Will you leave Libya?
هل ستترك ليبيا؟
Muammar Gaddafi clearly lost the confidence of his own people.
No one can kill Muammar Gaddafi.
And the legitimacy to lead.
They will die protecting Libya. شبر شبر، بيت بيت، دار دار، زنقة زنقة، فرد فرد، حتى تطلع أن يقول ملايين المهاجرين الفلسطينيين قرروا أن يرجعوا إلى فلسطين التي تنطلق منها عام 48 وعام 67. أنا معي الملايين ومعي الله. فلسطين المقدس هذا جهاد، هذا ليس إرهاب. هناك فرق كبير.
Innocent civilians were beaten.
We are here. We told them go everywhere. They found nothing. Zero.
Gaddafi will never step down. He's a fighter to the end.
Imprisoned, and in some cases killed.
According to Russia's military, they have not registered any of those airstrikes. According to them, the pictures show that nothing of that sort has been going on the ground.
The truth seems more to be a city going about its everyday business.
This warning, which is the world is watching you.
They're hiding this. They're hiding this about what's going on now, okay? All the people are here just to be supportive for our leader, Muammar Gaddafi, okay?
Sure, America has a dozen countries now helping attack Muammar Gaddafi.
They would like to see you finish.
أنت هو اللي صنعت بريطانيا وحامية أمريكا. معمر فيه رؤساء كانوا يقولوا.
To the West, we know them very well. When you are strong, you know, they run after you. They are like, you know, they're like cats.
ليش ما يكون فيها تحقيق في مقتل صدام حسين؟ قيادة عربية بالكامل تقتل تشنق المشانق عند طرف لماذا؟ وممكن الدور جاي عليكم كلكم.
Essentially taking sides in a civil war here, backing the rebels. What do we do if the rebels start behaving irresponsibly?
that the United Nations is on the wrong side of the conflict.
For you Arabs of Benghazi, you should be ashamed of yourselves. We know this has nothing to do with democracy.
قذافي اليوم ان شاء الله يوم ذبح قذافي.
وتطهرون البلاد كما قال قائدكم بيت بيت.
NATO is investigating claims by a Libyan doctor that 7 civilians were killed and 25 wounded as a result of a coalition airstrike near Brega.
احنا اللي بلاد محتله، فلسطين محتله والعراق محتله.
I think that you don't bomb a village in order to save it.
وعميد الحكام العرب وملك ملوك افريقيا وامام المسلمين، مكانتي العالميه ما تسمح لي اني ننزل لاي مستوى اخر، وشكرا.
Muammar Gaddafi clearly lost the confidence of his own people and the legitimacy to lead. Instead of respecting the rights of his own people, Gaddafi chose the path of brutal suppression. Ample warning was given that Gaddafi needed to stop his campaign of repression or be held accountable. The Arab League and the European Union joined us in calling for an end to violence. Just yesterday, speaking of the city of Benghazi, a city of roughly 700,000 people, he threatened, and I quote, "We will have no mercy and no pity." Now here's why this matters to us. Left unchecked, we have every reason to believe that Gaddafi would commit atrocities against his people. Many thousands could die. A humanitarian crisis would ensue. The entire region could be destabilized, endangering many of our allies and partners. And that's why the United States has worked with our allies and partners to shape a strong international response at the United Nations. Now, once more, Muammar Gaddafi has a choice. The resolution that passed lays out very clear conditions that must be met. The United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Arab states agree that a ceasefire must be implemented immediately. That means all attacks against civilians must stop. Gaddafi must stop his troops from advancing on Benghazi, pull them back from Ajubia, Misrata, and Zawiya, and establish water, electricity, and gas supplies to all areas. Humanitarian assistance must be allowed to reach the people of Libya. Let me be clear, these terms are not negotiable. These terms are not subject to negotiation. If Gaddafi does not comply with the resolution, the international community will impose consequences, and the resolution will be enforced through military action. the United States is prepared to act as part of an international coalition. American leadership is essential, but that does not mean acting alone. I've taken this decision with the confidence that action is necessary and that we will not be acting alone. Our goal is focused, our cause is just, and our coalition is strong. Thank you very much.
Right, so a UN resolution adopted in February suggests that Gaddafi might face the International Criminal Court over this. Is there a similarity between Gaddafi's position now and that of Slobodan Milosevic in the late 90s in Serbia?
I would say that there's definitely been a pattern implemented ever since the 1990s that any particular government that is being targeted for regime change is being criminalized and demonized in the press.
Just a week ago, media reports suggested that Gaddafi was close to defeat, but today he's still there, and news of his downfall proved to be exaggerated. Earlier, our Paula Sleer went to Tripoli to uncover how things really stood.
Part of the criticism reports that Gaddafi's warplanes bombed and killed dozens of protesters in the capital city.
Future of Libya appears to be on a knife edge. Fighter jets have been bombarding the capital, Tripoli, reportedly on the orders of leader Muammar Gaddafi.
Later on, they told us that Tripoli is bombed by Air Force and heavy guns or something like that. And completely it's not true.
The truth seems more to be a city going about its everyday business. These are hardly the pictures of a city on the brink of war.
Meanwhile, Libya's capital Tripoli is bracing for what could be another night of gunfire, explosions and fighting. Eyewitnesses say warplanes had been firing at opposition supporters from the air.
The war is clearly not in Tripoli. And just as clearly, Western media has been a little too quick to write off Gaddafi.
Information from Russia's joint staff who are saying that they have been monitoring the situation in Libya from space via satellites since the beginning of the unrest in the country. And according to them, some of the reports made by the Western media are not entirely corresponding to the pictures that they are getting. To be more precise, according to Al Jazeera and to BBC, on the 22nd of February, Libyan government has inflicted airstrikes on Benghazi, the biggest city in the country, and on Tripoli. And according to Russia's military, they have not registered any of those airstrikes. According to them, the pictures show that nothing of that sort has been going on the ground. Pretty much make a judgment that those attacks, which the Western media has been reporting on, have not been made.
Is that Colonel Gaddafi is really going to all extremes to push back, to make his presence felt. In an interview he gave and in an interview his son gave today, Saturday, both of them denied reports that the East was in the hands of the rebels. They said that they were in control, that everything was calm, and that any kind of reporting that the government was killing its own people was simply untrue. They blamed the Western media for what they have termed propaganda. People here simply do not want the foreign community to get involved. They believe that any kind of humanitarian assistance very often is an excuse for military aid and military intervention. The latest news we have, though, is that the British government today, Saturday, confirmed that it was deploying to Libya within the next 24 hours. We know that they say that this deployment is for evacuation and humanitarian purposes, but as I'm mentioning, many people here are concerned that it will also come with some kind of military aspect.
Fog of war has settled over the unrest in Libya. There's conflicting reports on the number of killed, airstrikes by Gaddafi forces, the number of cities controlled by the opposition, pretty much everything that's being reported. Last week, a wave of correspondence suggested the opposition was in control of almost the whole country and Gaddafi was doomed. Artizak Sanaboyko went to the opposition-held Benghazi to find out why these turned out to be exaggerations.
For it. On TV screens, Benghazi may look like the center of the rebel resistance.
The country is waking to another day of chaos.
Gaddafi may have lost about half of his country.
They watched these bombs fall from the skies.
But in reality, it's more like a seaside resort than a conflict zone. Hotels are fully booked with journalists, and residents go about their daily lives. Here, boys are looking for new things to play with. Toy guns are in ample supply. Yet some reports sent from Benghazi refer to the situation in eastern Libya as war. Not a conflict zone where rebels are engaged in sporadic and isolated pitched battles with pro-Gaddafi forces, but an all-out war.
Muammar Gaddafi is striking back.
Forces loyal to Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi appear to be advancing east.
Libya's leader Muammar Gaddafi has fled the country. With rebels professing their readiness to fight Gaddafi's regime to the bitter end, no wonder news reports are carrying predictions of imminent civil war. Yet, as the rebels' inability to mount a fully fledged offensive becomes more apparent, so is the unbalanced nature of the coverage. Rather than being impartial observers, some networks stop short of directing the protesters. But here, the Al Jazeera crew is warming up the crowd in time for their next live report.
What is your general take on why there is so much misinformation and conflicting reports when it comes to Libya?
Well, it's basically a psychological operation. There's an entire wing of the Pentagon and the State Department that's dedicated to psychological operations. These are perception management is the modern term. The previous term was propaganda. But psychological operation is to convince the American public or the English-speaking world and English news-consuming world that something's going on that may or may not be actually happening, and that's what we're seeing a lot of with respect to Libya. There's no shortage of war zones to go to today where people are dying at the rate of 1,500 people a day in eastern Congo. Journalists go in and out of there, but it's not being reported at all. Same thing with Sudan. There's conflict going on in certain regions of Sudan. The conflict in Afghanistan, but what we're getting is a pro-U.S., pro-Pentagon, one-sided picture of a situation which fills the media with the idea that there's freedom fighters involved in Libya and that there's a government regime that's been an atrocious terrorist government. In fact, the oil maps of Libya are huge and the oil concessions are huge, and it's a massive oil operation that's been going on with the support and the involvement of Italy, France, and Britain since 1970, since 1959 when the oil was discovered. But the U.S. hasn't had a piece of that pie. So the idea is to continue to convince the American public that genocide is happening in Libya, which is absolute nonsense, and therefore we need to take the all-powerful white American role is to go out there and save somebody that needs saving, when actually we're involved in the killing because I believe we're supporting the rebels in Libya.
Now back to our top story. According to reports, gunfire and explosions are heard in Tripoli, but eyewitnesses say the information is being wildly exaggerated. We can now cross live to our independent journalist, Lizzie Phelan, to hear her account about the situation on the ground there. Now, hello, Lizzie, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Can you confirm at this point that the reports that there are heavy gunfire on the ground right now?
Yes, well, you might be able to hear in the background, I'm not sure if you can, the gunfire and fireworks that are happening. And this gunfire and fireworks is celebratory gunfire and fireworks as a result of the earlier emergence of rebels in the city, or armed gangs, as the Libyan government are calling them, that have now been cleared out of the city, and they've now been captured and arrested and essentially dealt with. So the only gunfire that we're hearing is celebratory gunfire, and the only explosions that we're hearing are NATO airstrikes or NATO sound bombs, which are clearly designed to create a sense of panic in the capital city of Tripoli. Now, what we're hearing that happened earlier today is that the rebels in Libya, via their media, via their own channels, they created, and via Al Jazeera, of course, which has been at the center of the media conspiracy against Libya, they created some fake footage of themselves inside Zawiya, claiming that they were inside Zawiya and Tripoli. This and of course the media then, the mainstream media, the Western media in particular, and Al Jazeera then repeated these reports, which created a sense of panic amongst the Libyan people. So they went inside their homes in fear, and then later on, in areas like Fashlun and Sukarjuma, and after the prayers, a number of armed gangs emerged, which are essentially sleeper cells of rebels inside the city, and began firing randomly and setting things on fire and threatening ordinary people that if they did not join them, that they would be assassinated. They then took footage of the streets, which were empty, as I said, because people were scared inside their homes, which created a sense that they were in the process of capturing the city. Then what happened is that, of course, that many people in Tripoli have been armed by the government, and so these people came out to defend their capital. And then the government spokesman came out and insisted that the situation had been brought under control. And so, as a result, now in Green Square and Bab al-Ziza compound, the masses have come out because they feel safe again. And as I said, they're letting off celebratory gunfire and fireworks. And leader Muammar Gaddafi, just about 15-20 minutes ago, spoke to the masses live, because there have obviously been reports that he has fled the country.
Now, you mentioned that Gaddafi has actually shown up and spoken to the people, has made a public appearance, and you're saying that now the people are not scared at this moment in time.
No, well, he didn't make a public appearance. He spoke live via phone to insist that he was still alive and well and inside the country. And whenever Gaddafi speaks, there tends to be a pattern of a level of panic being built up by the media, because, of course, NATO isn't having any success on the ground. So the only way it can have a semblance of success is through creating fabrications via the media, so that it can convince both the Security Council and the international public opinion that its war here is worthwhile.
Do you think that Gaddafi's people are preparing, at least on some level, for an assault?
Well, the people here since the beginning of the crisis have been preparing to defend themselves from the threat of the opposition making any advances, and also from the threat of NATO. So, as I said, since the beginning of the crisis, people have been taking up the government offer of weapons training and government-issued weapons. So the people of this city in particular are literally armed to the teeth and ready to defend their capital and their country, and stand by their leader Muammar Gaddafi. As we have seen via the million marches across the country, there is mass support for him here, and the people are literally prepared to die for him and their country.
Today's events, though, bring to a close the 42-year reign of this ruthless dictator. The blood of so many lives on his hands.
There is a cacophony of celebration behind us.
Images smothered across screens of celebration. The Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi dead.
This mad dog of the Middle East has a goal of a world revolution.
Once despised as a sponsor of world terrorism, only years later, Muammar Gaddafi's friendship with the Western world blossomed.
Ties between the United States and Libya have taken a remarkable and positive turn in recent years.
Senator John McCain reminisces over time spent with the Libyan leader. In 2009, he tweeted, "Late evening with Colonel Gaddafi at his ranch in Libya. Interesting meeting with an interesting man." Less than a decade ago, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice announced the U.S. was restoring full diplomatic relations with Libya. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair had no qualms doing business with Gaddafi. And Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi got cozy with him at a United Nations summit in Rome. And here's President Obama shaking hands with him at the G8 summit in Italy. The Libyan leader also got close with British Prime Minister Gordon Brown. And from politics to pop stars, icons from Mariah Carey to Beyonce have performed for the Libyan leader. All the while, Western leaders were well aware of the atrocities being committed by Gaddafi's regime. It was no secret that in the mid-90s, an estimated 1,200 political prisoners were massacred. But there was no talk of intervention then. There was talk of oil deals. But the relationship turned sour early this year when NATO launched military operations against Libya. Today, a victory for the West, the death of a dictator, of a good friend turned enemy.
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed. Yes, we came, we saw, he died. Did it have anything to do with your visit? No, oh, I'm sure it did.
We will try to arrange that. I am very pleased to welcome Minister Gaddafi here to the State Department.
We deeply value the relationship between the United States and Libya. We have many opportunities to deepen and broaden our cooperation, and I'm very much looking forward to building on this relationship. So, Mr. Minister, welcome so much here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're delighted you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
The ambassador from Libya says.
Today, I'll give you the reason why the West is fighting Gaddafi. I'll tell you exactly what is really going on in Libya. I will tell you what the mainstream media will not tell you. There are 3 reasons why Gaddafi has to die. And among those 3 reasons, none of them have to do with him killing his own people. Number 1, Gaddafi is the one who gave the opportunity for an African satellite for communication. It is in 1992 that 45 countries in Africa decided that they want to have their own satellite. This will cover internet, telephone communication, and all other communications. But the problem was how to find the money for this project. Where did they get the money from? They decided to go to the IMF. But the IMF knew that sponsoring this will be more dangerous for Western countries. Why? Because Western countries were making $500 million per year for all telecommunication in Africa, even inside Africa. $500 million per year. Not includes interest. That's how much they were making. So it is in 2007 that Gaddafi will come up with most of the money for this project. Africa will now have his first communication satellite, which will give the opportunity to countries like South Africa, Nigeria, Algeria, Angola, Libya, and other countries to now have their own telecommunication satellites. They will now provide communication to their own people. It will only cost African countries $400 million, only a one payment of $400 million to make this happen. Now you imagine how much money does Europe lost because of this? $500 million per year that Gaddafi made them lose by sponsoring this satellite. Just Gaddafi himself comes up with $300 million, and other countries can impeach him. So this is reason number 1 why they need Gaddafi dead. 2, Gaddafi and African countries decide to create 3 major banks in Africa. 1, the AMF, African Monetary Fund. The African Monetary Fund will headquarter in Cameroon, Yaoundé. This was to be created in 2011, this year. With the African Monetary Fund, African countries will no longer need to go to the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund. So just imagine yourself how much money Europe will lose if the AMF is created. When Western countries found that this is what was happening, they actually wanted to be part of it. I believe it is in 2006 in Yaoundé, Cameroon, that African countries decided that no other countries outside of Africa will be part of the AMF. Now you can imagine what's going on here. Not only that they're trying to cut them money, but on top of that, they don't even want them to be part of this. Because being part of this will mean that they will have to control what is going on. The second bank will be the Central African Bank. The Central African Bank will be headquartered in Abuja in Nigeria. What this bank will do, it will stop African countries from using Western currencies. Like if you go to Africa today, countries like Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Gabon, and many other French-speaking countries are using the franc CFA. With this bank, we will have our own currency, like the Naira in Nigeria. Gaddafi, once again, came up with most of the money for this project. And the third bank that was supposed to be created was going to headquarter in Libya, the Bank of Investment. This bank will control most of investment in Africa. The Central Bank of Investment. Now you imagine yourself what's going on here. Gaddafi is trying to break Western economy by doing this. But that's not his intention. His intention is to free Africa from his trap. African people want to be independent. Western countries don't want that. And that's what's going on here. So the money that Obama confiscated, stole from Gaddafi is the money that was going to help for all those projects. He's telling you today that Gaddafi is trying to kill his own people with that money. No, Mr. President, you know that that's not true. He probably doesn't even know because he has no experience. He has no experience. He doesn't even know what's going on. He's like a puppy. They tell him what to do. Oh, well, let me inform you, Mr. President, that money was going to sponsor all those projects. That money that you confiscated from Libya. The third reason why Gaddafi has to die has to do with the United States of Africa. This man has been pushing African countries to unite, just like the United States of America. The very first thing that European countries, when they were colonizing African countries, did was to divide African people. When you want to break a powerful home, you have to find a way to turn that family against each other. That's the very first thing Western countries did to keep us from being powerful. The second thing they did was to stop education. Make sure that African people are not educated. Education is the key to success. By us being educated and educating our own people, we are stopping major problems in Africa. And the third thing they did was to place dictators in power in Africa who will give them everything they want. And every time that the population will stand up, these dictators will have the support of European countries to kill those protesters. They were all surprised with what happened in Tunisia, in Egypt. And they took the opportunity to then create a problem in Libya. Not one of you will show me footage of the same uprising that we saw in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya. Not one of you will show me that type of footage. This was created by Western countries. When you go to Libya, you get free education. I'm talking about college education, free healthcare. When you are newlywed and you don't yet have a job, you get free apartments. Libya is a beautiful country. And today they're telling us that Gaddafi is killing his own people. But yet he's the same one who's giving them everything. Free education, free healthcare, feeding his own people, and killing them again. Does that make sense to you? Let me tell you what the countries that are bombing Libya today have in common. They are broke. Oh yes, they are broke. Just the United States alone is borrowing money from China. Europe is going down with the euro. Every one of those countries in NATO are broke. And Gaddafi is making it worse by giving African people independence. And that's why you see Hillary Clinton going to Africa and telling African people to reject Gaddafi. Don't deal with Gaddafi. In fact, they've requested that the rebels open an embassy in Washington, D.C., making an illegal movement legal. That's what the Obama administration is doing. Hillary Clinton is also asking African people not to deal with China. Tell me, let me just ask this, man. What can China do to African countries that Western countries haven't done yet? I like to know myself. How worse can it be? Far as I'm concerned, China is not the one going around bombing other countries. I can't remember the last war China has been in. China is not the one killing African people today with drones. China is not the one fighting in Iraq or Afghanistan in the name of democracy. China is making money. Why not deal with China? What have you done to African people that is good? What have you given African people that is good? When you are going somewhere in Africa, in different African countries, and asking African people not to deal with China, what are we receiving in exchange of that? Other than bombs, drones, and everything else. What are we receiving? China is the #1 investors in Africa. The African satellite that I'm talking about today was put together by Chinese and Russians. We African people will survive. We've survived your drones and your bombing, your insult, and everything else, your humiliations. We've survived that. China is not going to do anything to us that you haven't done yet. So, Mr. President, let me tell you this. If you're not ashamed, I'm ashamed for you. I'm embarrassed for you. The first African American president. And this is what you're doing to your own country, to the world, to the people of your race. You are the nightmare of Martin Luther King. He's always talked about his dream. But his nightmare was to see an African president of the United States of America doing what you are doing today, misrepresenting the black race. We're not asking you to give your attention only on African people or only on black people, but to show a good example of what leading is, of what fairness is, of what democracy is really about. the things that Martin Luther King died for, not just for the liberation of African people, but for fair treatment of everybody. Blacks and whites equal, fighting together, sharing. This is an embarrassment, and this is a shame. And I hope you stay a one-term president.
وثبت أن ما فيه ديمقراطية هناك، بل هناك دكتاتورية لا تختلف أبدا عن دكتاتورية هتلر أو نابليون أو موسوليني أو جنكيز خان أو اسكندر إلى آخر الطغاة. بأمر رئاسي يقال هكذا في عهد ريغن المجنون، يقال بأمر رئاسي أصدر الرئيس الأمريكي ريغن أمر رئاسي بالحرب مثلا، أمر رئاسي بمحاصرة ليبيا، أمر رئاسي بمقاطعة ليبيا، أمر رئاسي بعمل كذا كذا. هل هذه ليست دكتاتورية؟ هذه ديمقراطية؟ الآن انتخابات أمريكية، طلع مواطن أسود أصله من كينيا، إفريقي ومسلم، وكان يدرس في مدرسة إسلامية في إندونيسيا، اسمه أوباما، والناس كلهم صفقوا لهذه الشخصية في الوطن العربي وفي العالم الإسلامي وفي إفريقيا، واستبشروا بخير وصفقوا له وصلوا من أجله ودعوا له بالنجاح، وربما يكونوا قد دخلوا حتى في حملات التبرع الشرعية لتمكينه من الفوز في رئاسة أمريكا. لكن فوجئنا بأن أخانا وشقيقنا الأفريقي الكيني الأمريكي الجنسية يطلع بتصريحات صدمت كل مؤيديه في العالم العربي وفي إفريقيا وفي العالم الإسلامي. نحن نتمنى وربما تكون هكذا ان هي مجرد زي ما يقولوا في مصر كوزيون انتخابي، هذه مناسبة انتخابية، ان كذبة انتخابية باش تعرفوا مهزلة الانتخابات، ان الواحد يكذب على الناس لكي يعطوه اصواتها، وبعد ياتي التطبيق وينجح يقولون له انت وعدت بكذا بكذا، يقولون لا هذه دعاية انتخابية. شوفوا مهزلة، هذه الديمقراطية، لا هذه دعاية انتخابية، فاكرينها جد، فاكرينها مضبوط، نضحك عليكم يعني باخذ اصواتكم. ان شاء الله هي تكون هكذا مجرد دعاية انتخابية. لكن كونك هو يقول ان القدس سأعملها عاصمة الى الابد للاسرائيليين، هذا يدل على انه هو ان اخانا اوباما يجهل السياسة الدولية وما هوش مطلع على ملف الصراع في الشرق الاوسط. كنا نعتقد انه يقول انا قررت اذا نجحت سوف افتش مفاعل ديمونة لاتاكد من القنابل الذرية ومن اسلحة الدمار الشامل الاخرى عند الاسرائيليين، نبغى نتاكد منها ويدير قرار مثل هذا. لكن لابد انه عندما فكر في هذا، لابد انه فكر عندما كان يتكلم عن ايران برنامجها النووي، لابد ان تكون امام ديمونة بكل تاكيد. لكن لما تكون قدامه ديمونة لابد ان يكون قدامه مصير سلفه كندي الذي قرر ان يفتش مفاعل ديمونة، واصر على التفتيش ليتاكد من انه يصنع اسلحة ذرية والا لا. ورفض الإسرائيليون، وأخيرا أصر هو على التفتيش. كان المخرج من هذه الأزمة هو استقالة بن غوريون، استقال حتى لا يوافق على تفتيش مفاعل ديمونة، وأعطى الضوء الأخضر بقتل كندي، وهكذا قتل كندي بسبب مفاعل ديمونة وإصراره على تفتيشه. بسبب إصراره على تفتيشه قتل كندي. لابد أن أوباما أمام هذه الصورة، وبالتالي لابد أنه كان يريد أن يتكلم عن هذا ولكنه يتراجع. كنا نتوقع منه أن يقول أني سأطبق إذا نجحت فكرة الدولة الواحدة إسراطيل الموجودة في الكتاب الأبيض للقذافي، إن هذه الفكرة هي الفكرة اللي فيها الحل الجذري والتاريخي والنهائي، وأنه مستحيل إقامة دولتين قزميتين في هذه المنطقة. أي دولة عمق 15 كيلومتر، ما يسمى بإسرائيل الآن عمق 15 كيلومتر، أي دولة هذه أمام 5 ملايين من الفلسطينيين. كنا نتوقع أن يقول ملايين اللاجئين الفلسطينيين قررت أن أرجعهم لأرض فلسطين التي طردوا منها عام 48 وعام 67. هذا هو التغيير الذي تتفق له الشعوب ويريده الشعب الأمريكي والشعب الأسود في أمريكا. كنا نعتقد أن يقول أني أعمل من أجل استقلال الأمة الكردية وتوحيدها، ولا بد أن تحتل في الشرق الأدنى مكانة تحت الشمس وفوق الأرض الأمة الكردية الممزقة المعذبة المضطهدة المستعمرة من الكل. كان يجب أن يقف إلى جانبها، لا يقف مع العملاء ويضحي بمصير الأمة الكردية. هذا التغيير والخوف، كل الخوف هو ان هذا الكلام في وقت اقول ان الاسود يشعر بالنقص، عقده النقص، هذا شيء خطير. اذا كان اخونا اوباما شعر بانه هو اسود وانه ليس له الحق في ان يحكم امريكا، هذه المصيبه الكبيره، لان هذا الشعور خطير جدا يجعله يتصرف ابيض اكثر من البيض، ويبالغ في اضطهاد السود واحتقارها. نحن نقول له يا أخي الأسود والأبيض في أمريكا متساويين، كلهم مهاجرين. أمريكا ليست للبيض ولا للسود، أمريكا للهنود الحمر سكانها الأصليين. جاء الأبيض وجاء الأسود، إذن الأبيض والأسود في أمريكا متساويين، ومن حق أوباما أن يرفع راسه ويقول أنا شريك في أمريكا. أمريكا أرضي مثل ما أرضكم أنتم، إذا كان ما يش أرضي حتى أنتم ليست أرضكم، أرض الهنود الحمر. أنتم مهاجرون نحن مهاجرون. لكن ما زلنا احنا نامل ان الاسود هذا يكون معتز بافريقيته وباسلامه وبعقيدته، وانه صاحب حق في امريكا، وان يغير امريكا من الشر الى الخير، وان تقيم العلاقات اللي تخدم امريكا مع الشعوب الاخرى خاصه مع العرب.
Breaking news. The United Nations Security Council has moments ago voted on a resolution imposing a no-fly zone extending over all of Libya, and that, quote, all necessary means can be used to protect citizens.
Resolution 1973 was adopted by 10 votes to 0, with 5 abstentions. The abstentions included China, Russia, Brazil, Germany, and India. The UN established a no-fly zone, banning all flights except those for humanitarian purposes in Libya airspace in order to help protect civilians. But it also considers other elements.
It imposes a ban on all Libyan flights. It imposes an assets freeze on assets owned by the Libyan authorities, money which should be used to the benefit of the Libyan people.
Western powers have frozen the assets of Muammar Gaddafi and other senior figures in the Libyan government. They say the aim is to help bring down the government refusing the will of its people. But as RT's Lauren Lister reports, history suggests Libya may never see its money again after the international wealth grab.
As violence continues in Libya, the U.S. sends warships and more troops in that direction, fueling speculation of a military intervention. Meanwhile, Western countries may have already launched a war against Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi's North African regime.
Most countries consider the freezing of their assets as an act of economic warfare.
The weapons here, the foreign assets of either Libya, the country, or Gaddafi and his family, that some estimate to be almost $100 billion. It's believed to be spread across the globe, oil money invested through the country's sovereign wealth fund, and billions of dollars of cash in banks throughout Europe and the U.S.
The question now is what happens to all this money, especially the $30 billion the United States has frozen, the most ever in the history of this country in this type of situation. It essentially cuts Libya off from the entire U.S. banking system.
To enact these sanctions, the U.S. president declared the situation in Libya, quote, an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. national security and foreign policy. That's not typical considering there's not a clear aggressive action Libya has taken against the U.S. As for Libya's financial interests, analysts say you could look to the history of countries such as Iran. Their assets were frozen in the wake of the 1979 hostage crisis.
Their money that was seized from Iran back in 1979 has still, not been returned to the Iranians. So it's basically time for a plunder play. If we can take it away from them, we will.
Number one, Gaddafi nationalized Libya's vast oil resources and used his influence within OPEC to negotiate fairer prices for oil-producing countries. Two, Gaddafi used the oil revenue to build schools, hospitals, universities, and infrastructure. Three, he raised the literacy rate from 20% when he became the leader, and now it is 83%. Libya has one of the finest healthcare systems in the third world. All people have access to doctors, hospitals, clinics, and medicines free of charge. If a Libyan needs surgery that is unavailable in Libya, funding is provided for that surgery to be carried out overseas. He raised the life expectancy from 44 years now to 75. Basic food items were subsidized and electricity was made available throughout the country. He spent billions on the man-made river where his engineers brought water up out of the desert. And now pipelines run from Benghazi and Tobruk almost to the door of Tunisia. This man has set up irrigation projects which were established in order to support a drive toward agricultural development and food self-sufficiency. Any Libyan who wanted to become a farmer was and still is given free use of land, a house, farm equipment, livestock, and seed. Gaddafi vowed that his own parents, who lived in a tent in the desert, would not be housed until every Libyan was housed. He fulfilled that promise. Under Gaddafi, Libya has now attained the highest standard of living in Africa. Listen to this. Money from Libya's oil revenue is deposited into the bank account of every Libyan. Women have full access to education, employment, and he has enabled women to serve in the armed forces. If he has lost the moral right to lead his people, what about you? What about homelessness? The rate in Britain is nearing 8%. In France, they estimate that 200,000 people live on the streets. In America, there are nearly 1 million living under bridges, homeless. We save America for last because America started all this. You are the one that called for such action, and you maneuvered this resolution 1973 through the Security Council and fought for it and were the proudest when it passed. You are the one that called for Gaddafi to step down and leave his country, and you are the first to say that he has lost the moral right to lead Libya, and you are the first to call for his assassination. Well, America, you are hemorrhaging jobs. Nearly 8 million jobs were lost in this latest recession. America now has 15 million unemployed, and when you add to that the underemployed, it comes to nearly 20 million Americans. 44 million Americans now live below the poverty level, and that is rising. A full 1/3 of American families tasted poverty for at least a couple of months last year. That's 100 million Americans. And the number of households collecting emergency food aid is now nearing 6 million. Approximately 1 in 8 American people are using food stamps. 3 million U.S. properties went into foreclosure in 2010 alone, a record high. And the number of families in homeless shelters or forced to live with extended family or friends is nearing 1 million. 50 million Americans have no health insurance, and that's 17% of the total U.S. population. 68 adults in America die each day in the U.S. due to the lack of health insurance. And what about your veterans, America? Those whom you send to fight your unjust wars. How do they fare when they return home? The Pentagon says that 1 in 5 American soldiers are returning from the war zones with some form of traumatic brain injury. Still others suffer emotional trauma. About 130,000 veterans become homeless each year in the United States, and more than half are black and Hispanic. The Veterans Administration estimates that 107,000 veterans are homeless on any given night. Suicide rates, divorce, and drug dependency are alarmingly high and worsening among America's veterans. Your infrastructure is even worse off than your citizens. A full 1/4 of the nation's bridges are structurally dangerous. 7 billion gallons of clean water leak out of your crumbling pipes every day, while billions of gallons of raw sewage pours into your lakes and rivers. According to your engineers, it will take $2.2 trillion to fix this problem. Your record, America, stinks in the nostrils of God. You who in the name of humanitarian efforts want to save the population of Libya, save them from whom and from what? How many Libyans are living in poverty? What's the crime rate in Libyan society in comparison to you who condemn Muammar Gaddafi? How many homes has he built for his people? How many of his people are living under bridges? No Libyan lives in poverty, not one. The crime rate in Libyan society is nothing in comparison to those of you who condemn him and his rule of Libya. He has built hundreds of thousands and into the millions of homes for his people. No Libyan is homeless. No Libyan is living under a bridge. Why are you angry with him? What has he done to bring down on him the wrath of the West? The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said to me, the 3 most hated of men are: 1, a rich man who gives away his wealth to the poor, a wise man who shares his knowledge with the ignorant, and the man to whom the Holy Quran is revealed. Why do you hate Gaddafi? Does he share the wealth of Libya with the poor? Well, if he does, and he does, doesn't that make you, America, look bad? You are the richest nation on the earth, and you've got 44 million people living in poverty, bread lines, food stamps, children suffering in America, but you want to talk to Gaddafi about humanitarian concerns? Gaddafi believes that economic democracy can only be achieved when the GDP of a country benefits all its citizens and when the country's wealth is dispersed to every single citizen. Is this why Muammar Gaddafi, when he came to the United Nations, called the Security Council the Terror Council? Since this Security Council and this United Nation was established in 1945, you said you wanted to bring peace in the world. But there have been 65 different wars since then, and now many more are arising as we speak. Is this your work? Then why should we have a United Nations when you have failed to bring about what you said you would bring about in your charter? So has the United Nations lost its legitimate right to exist? In the park across the street from the United Nations, there's a wall with the inscription from Isaiah the prophet that reads, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." So your hypocrisy is engraved in granite. So when you look at it and look at the actions of the United Nations, you tell me, is that a worthy institution to continue? The preamble of the Charter of the United States Nations claims that it was being formed to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. But Brother Gaddafi said, quote, "Terrorism is not only the terrorism of Al-Qaeda. The status quo is terrorism. As for now, the Security Council is a feudal security, a feudal policy for permanent members. It protects them and it uses it against us. Hence, it should not be called the Security Council, rather the Terror Council. Since the Security Council was established in 1945 and until now, it has not provided security for us, rather provided punishments and terror." Has the United Nations lost its legitimate right to exist? Shouldn't this institution be done away with or completely reformed? But who's got the courage? Who's got the strength? You are weak and cowardly, and you deserve what you get. America is ruled by special interests, not by the needs, rights, and interests of the American people. And you dare to say that the Arab world that is rising wants your democracy? No. They want liberty. They want justice. They want equity. They want a government that serves the needs, rights, and interests of the people. That's what they want, and this is why Muammar Gaddafi said, this is not Egypt, this is not Tunisia, this is not Bahrain, this is not that, because he has looked out for the needs, rights, and interests of the Libyan people. That does not mean to say that there's no dissatisfaction in Libya, and whether that dissatisfaction is legitimate or not. But if there is dissatisfaction, then let the Libyan people come together and sort out their problems as intelligent, civilized people should do. But it is your intervention. You gonna hear me today. I was in Iraq 3 days before the bombs fell in '91. There were Muslim Sunni mosques. There were Shia mosques. There were Christian churches and Jewish temples and synagogues. And even under Saddam Hussein, there was peace among them. Isn't that right, Brother Baghdadi? But when America went in, under the guise that he had weapons of mass destruction, did they find any? So what was shock and awe about? You want to bring Gaddafi before the International Criminal Court? What about Bush? What about Rumsfeld? What about a government that lied to the American people and caused the lives of hundreds of thousands to be lost?
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Early on Tuesday, striking around Muammar Gaddafi's residential.
We joined the United Nations because we wanted the charter to be like that. It says that the armed forces only use it when it is a common interest to all nations. But after that, what happened? 65 wars broke out after the establishment of the United Nations and after the establishment of the Security Councils, and after this establishment, 65, and the victims are millions more than the victims of the Second World War. Are these wars and the aggressions and the force that was used, the power in the 65 was in the interest of the common interest of all of us? No, it was in the interest of one country or 3 countries or 4 countries or 1 country, but it was not in the interest of all the nations.
The coalition said destroying Gaddafi was not their goal. Then why bomb his palaces? Now some officials have claimed that eliminating him was in fact their goal.
Libya. It's a vast country, hot, dusty, and dry, 90% desert. So you may be surprised to know there's a huge river flowing beneath it, a vital source of drinking water for Libya's cities, a man-made river that could one day even turn desert into farmland.
A land thirsting for water and home to one of the most ambitious irrigation schemes in the world. It's called the Great Man-Made River, and it flows beneath these sands. It is colossal in scale. 500,000 concrete pipes have been made and laid down over the past 2.5 decades. 6,000 kilometers of pipeline. Engineers digging deep into the bowels of the earth to tap into ancient aquifers. Libyans call it the 8th wonder of the world.
There is water in the Libyan Sahara deserts since a million years ago, and we have to use it. We have to use this water.
Planners here want to irrigate to reduce the country's heavy dependence on food imports. The parched lands around this huge man-made lake near Benghazi are slowly being turned to agricultural use. In its early days, skeptics called it the Great Madman's River, a reference to the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi and its enormous expense, billions of dollars. And the Great Man-Made River comes with a great unknown. Nobody knows just how long the water will last. But that makes it no less vital than a country battling to keep the desert at bay. And Libyans will make no apologies for drawing what is to them life's blood in a dry, dry land. Margaret Evans, CBC News, in the Libyan desert.
British intelligence has reportedly played a key role in the latest push on Tripoli by rebels. According to a report in the UK daily The Telegraph, MI6 officers advised the rebels on the strategy behind the operation and a plan drawn up weeks ago. For more on that, let's cross to RT's Ivor Bennett, who is in London. So, Ivor, we know the rebels had NATO air support for their push into Tripoli, but now it seems they were being guided on the ground as well, if these reports are true.
Yes, it seems like the British had a bigger hand in all of this than they originally let on. The British press today reporting that a team of intelligence officials have been operating in the country for some months now. People like spies, spooks, ex-SAS officers giving advice to the rebels after it emerged that the rebels were this haphazard bunch, untrained, and that they'd need some help if they were actually going to topple Gaddafi. Now, the mandate that NATO have been operating under in the country did not include ground troops, of course, so this has been quite a clandestine, off-the-grid operation, and William Hague, the UK Foreign Secretary, was keen to stress that the advice and kit that they've been supplying to the rebels has been non-lethal, things like night vision goggles, body armour and telecommunications equipment, but it did emerge last night that they did also have a big hand in coordinating this assault on Tripoli that's been in the pipeline for some months now, apparently, with weapons, fighters and communications equipment being smuggled to secret weapons dumps around Tripoli. Then when the Air Force paved the way over the weekend, bombing strategic communications depots belonging to Gaddafi, that paved the way, the signal was given, and then the assault on Tripoli began to surprise Gaddafi's forces. And whilst the British government knew it was going to happen, they too, it seems, were surprised that all the events happened so quickly.
And Ira, what about elsewhere in the EU? To what extent are other countries involved in what's going on in Libya at the moment?
Well, the reaction across Europe has been the same, and that is that what happens next has to be in the hands of the Libyan people, so they're in charge of their own future under a democratic leadership. That's the main message coming from all the EU states, really. But there is some contradiction to all of that under the question of when does it start, with some reluctance as to from European leaders into bringing out and withdrawing the NATO troops. Yesterday we heard Cameron saying that they'll stay there for as long as it takes. Clearly they think it will take longer than is desired. And also Downing Street last night actually refused to rule out bringing in UK troops as peacekeepers should the transition that they're all talking of descend into anarchy. And they've even got 200 UK troops stationed in Cyprus ready to be deployed to Libya at the drop of a hat should they need it. So clearly, despite all this talk of transition and handing over power, there is some confusion and ambiguity as to when they'll actually start and finish.
You will see that the rebels have new foreign weapons which were not adopted by the Libyan military forces. Foreign instructors, foreign weapons, foreign money, foreign scenario, but native blood. When the flow of pictures from Libya started, the evident staged character of the pictures led one to want to take a deeper look at the situation. Note, all the pictures shown were taken by Western journalists, highlighting the situation from the rebel standpoint only. And from the very first frames of film it hit me, the weapons and equipment of those rebels simply could not have been so massive in number and so brand new. Unless the weapons somehow found their way there on time from the outside.
Superpowers have interests, complicated interests, and they use the interests, they use the Security Council, they use the power of the United Nations to protect their interests. And these terrorize, intimidated the third world. The third world is terrified and being terrorized and living under the fear of terror.
You can see in this ordinary demonstrator's hands the light automatic rifle FN-FAL, absolutely brand new, right out of the box. The rifle was produced by the Belgian armaments manufacturer FN. During the Cold War, it was adopted by many North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries, with the notable exception of the United States, is one of the most widely used rifles in history, having been used by over 90 countries. The light automatic rifle was predominantly chambered for the 7.62 by 51mm NATO round, and because of its prevalence and widespread use amongst the armed forces of many NATO countries during the Cold War, it was nicknamed the right hand of the free world. This guy has another brand new FN-FAL. And as does this guy as well. In the next photo you can see a mob scene and a guy wearing a white headscarf. He also has an FN-FAL. This means that the rebels could not get all of those FN-FAL rifles from military storage points. And they certainly couldn't buy them in a store. So the question is, where did they get them from? And even more importantly, how could they get the enormous amounts of ammo needed for the rifles when Gaddafi didn't have them?
Libya's cash-starved rebels got a much-needed boost. Nations here signing off on promises of more than $1 billion of aid. But it's not just money the rebels want from the international community.
We are asking countries to recognize the Transitional National Council as the legitimate and sole representative of the Libyan people.
As you can see, these are US machine guns chambered for NATO rounds. And again, they're absolutely brand new, right out of the box. Gaddafi couldn't have a weapon like this because of 40 years of embargo. And also, he really wouldn't need it because the rounds for it are very expensive and getting them delivered is a big problem. It'd be much cheaper and much easier to buy Chinese machine guns chambered for Soviet rounds. Oh, well, there we go. That's a Chinese heavy machine gun. But this picture's interesting not because of the machine gun itself, but because of the fact that the machine gun is again brand new, right from the plant, as well as the instructors who are teaching the Libyan fodder how to use the weapon. And now can you see what this is hinting at? Normally machine guns don't come with their own instructors to teach you how to use them.
Libya's cash-starved rebels got a much-needed boost. Nations here signing off on promises of more than $1 billion of aid.
But then again, machine guns alone don't win a revolution. You need something with some real firepower. And well, here's something. This is an MP-80S man-portable air defense system. Each one of these costs big money on the black market and requires a qualified professional to maintain them. And so that's why we can see an instructor here. The guy teaching the Libyans to manage this high-tech device sure doesn't look like one of them, does he? And here we can see a joker running around with a US Army pistol and a NATO Kevlar combat helmet. Now how could he get all this? From Gaddafi's military storage? Come on. Okay, this crate is American and brand new. I think you can realize that by now. For example, if you look at the perfect condition of the crate, straps, come on, you can't tell me that this came from Gaddafi's ancient storages. Let me remind you, Libya had a 40-year embargo, so there's no way that Libya could have bought the weapons or the rounds from the US or the UK. It's purely fiction. And by the way, here you can see the recoilless M40 itself. As you can see here, the rifle and the Toyota mini truck don't really give you the impression of a scrappy rebel force fighting for freedom. Wow, and among the rebels we can surprisingly see some African mercenaries that were allegedly hired by Gaddafi to fire on the people. So finally, what is the general conclusion that you can make from our brief photo investigation?
Well, we can see a lot of brand new NATO weapons, foreign instructors, American ammo, new uniforms and equipment, and a suspiciously large amount of non-Libyan mugs.
Do you know what this looks like? You're absolutely right. It definitely looks like a well-organized coup from abroad. The foreign managers have brought the people, provided the brand new weapons,
instructors, and equipment, all to the young people in Libya. Naive young people who work for free drugs, dope, and just the rush of being a revolutionary. Well, maybe you still don't believe me. You've taken a look at all the photos, and there's still some doubt. Well, let me show you one last photo. This is what a real desert fighter looks like. No clean NATO weapons, no shining brand new American ammo from unopened boxes, and no Kevlar vests from Europe. Just some rags, an old gun, an axe, and the will to fight. That's what you see there, and that's what everyone fighting should look like. So what's your opinion now? Do you really think all those people in the previous photos are real common demonstrators?
Well, more speculation has been raised on the reasons for NATO's intervention in Libya. And as RT's Laura Emmett reports, the organisation may have been trying to prevent Gaddafi from burying the American buck.
According to some, it's about protecting civilians.
We must not tolerate this regime using military force against its own people.
Others say it's about oil.
The only reason they're interested with Libya is about the oil. You'd think we'd be in Iraq if the major export there was broccoli.
But some are convinced intervention in Libya is all about currency, specifically Gaddafi's plan to introduce the gold dinar, a single African currency made from gold, a true sharing of the wealth.
It's one of these things that you have to plan almost in secret, because as soon as you say you're going to change over from the dollar to something else, you're going to be targeted. There were two conferences on this, one in 96 and another one in the year 2000, called the World Mataba Conference, organized by Gaddafi. And everybody was interested, and I think most countries in Africa were keen.
Gaddafi didn't give up. In the months leading up to the military intervention, he called on African and Muslim nations to join together to create this new currency that would rival the dollar and euro. They would sell oil and other resources around the world only for gold dinars. It's an idea that would shift the economic balance of the world. Countries' wealth would depend on how much gold they have, not how many dollars they trade. And Libya has 144 tons of gold. The UK has double that, but 10 times the population.
If Gaddafi had an intent to try to reprice his oil or whatever else the country was selling in the global markets and accept something else as a currency, or maybe launch a gold dinar currency, any move such as that would certainly not be welcomed by the power elite today who are responsible for controlling the world's central banks. So yes, that would certainly be something that would cause his immediate dismissal and the need for other reasons to be brought forth for removing him from power.
It's happened before. In 2000, Saddam Hussein announced Iraqi oil would be traded in euros, not dollars. Sanctions and an invasion followed. Some say because the Americans were desperate to prevent OPEC from transferring oil trading in all its member countries to the euro. The UK's gold is kept here in a secure vault somewhere in the depths of the Bank of England. As in most developed countries, there's not enough to go around. But that's not the case in places like Libya and many of the Gulf states. A gold dinar would have given oil-rich African and Middle Eastern countries the power to turn around to their energy-hungry customers and say, sorry, the price has gone up and we want gold. Some say the US and its NATO allies literally couldn't afford to let that happen. Laura Emmett, RT, London.
Well, the fight is not over in Tripoli, but the carve-up of Libya's vast oil riches, the biggest in Africa, is already beginning. The Italian foreign minister fired the starting gun, saying Italy's Eni oil company will play the #1 role in the region. As RT's Laura Emmett reports, the service won't come cheap for the Libyan people.
Delivered as a promise, but seen by many as more of a threat. David Cameron says NATO will stay while Libya makes the transition to democracy. As allied forces lend air support to the rebels to take Tripoli, the Stop the War coalition warns Libyans not to expect they're getting something for nothing.
The Western powers don't do this without asking for a payback. Why is it that the head of the TNC is running off to Paris to meet with the French president? Well, of course, that is one very, very important issue. It was why the Western powers, Tony Blair and others, struck a deal with Gaddafi in the first place. It will be exactly what they're seeking to continue with the TNC, to further exploit those oil riches.
The British government makes no secret of the fact that its motives in supporting the rebels aren't entirely altruistic. Last year alone, the UK exported around $40 billion of goods and services to North Africa and the Middle East. But it's black gold that's the key. Libya has the largest oil reserves in Africa.
When Western powers look at the region, they talk about humanitarianism or democracy, but they think about oil.
Greg Muttitt says it's impossible not to draw a comparison with Iraq. He's written a book about the aftermath of the Iraq invasion, in which he maintains Western powers imposed a democracy which played on sectarian divisions. That ensured years of tribal struggle, but also meant the Allies retained control of the oil supply. While the UK government insists lessons have been learnt from Iraq, Western oil firms move into Libya. Even before the fate of Tripoli is sealed, the great oil grab is already beginning. BP has a contentious oil and gas exploration contract in Libya, which the UK government will be anxious for it to resume. Italian oil giant Eni is the first to send staff back to Libya, and its shares rose on the news. French Total and Austria's OMV also did well, as investors hoped they'd soon be able to resume production in Libya. But at what price to the Libyan people?
The great fear is that just as they did in Iraq, they'll create a democracy which serves British interests or the West's interests or oil companies' interests and does nothing for the people of Libya.
Laura Emmett, RT, London.
Mass grave of alleged pro-Gaddafi soldiers has been discovered in a rebel-controlled area of the country, according to British newspaper The Telegraph. The location was swiftly bulldozed after the discovery, suggesting an attempt to cover up the killings. The bodies were reportedly mutilated, adding to recent concerns of human rights abuses by rebels. Such crimes are being swept under the carpet to support NATO's cause in the region, or so says Sukan Chandan, a spokesman for the British Civilians for Peace in Libya movement.
I think really fundamentally there's been a problem the way the NATO nations and their media have related to these so-called rebels. I mean, these rebels have been conducting mass lynchings of black people throughout the first several weeks and months of this crisis. And I raised this directly in press conferences, and the answer was what? Silence. It wasn't covered in the media before because this does not fit the narrative since the 1999 NATO aggression against Yugoslavia, which was we are conducting these wars not for geopolitical control and domination and monopolization of mineral wealth, but for humanitarian reasons. So how can it fit the narrative that these rebels, which NATO and the NATO countries are supporting, are lynching black people, are conducting all the atrocities they accuse in the Gaddafi side of conducting, but actually the rebels are conducting these things. So it doesn't fit the narrative at all.
Well, throughout the course of the 4-month-long revolution against Colonel Gaddafi's regime, Libyans have found themselves surrounded by threats. NATO forces have killed hundreds of civilians during their bombardments, this according to government claims, and rebels have been accused of committing atrocities against their own people. RT's Maria Finoshina explains.
This family hasn't had a walk, quiet and peaceful like this one, for months.
They've escaped from the Libyan rebel stronghold of Benghazi to hide in this refugee camp in the west of the country after life in their native town became a nightmare.
It's not safe there anymore. It's become dangerous. And it's not only because of explosions and gunshots. One day people from the government in Benghazi, you call them rebels, we call them terrorists, came to me and told me, we have to arrest your daughter because we know that she supports Gaddafi.
The escape has been long and hard for the women and their family.
I had to hide for some time from them, as they've been searching for me. Then we knew there was a bus coming from Benghazi to Tunisia, the bus with the rebels, for their purposes. We took that bus with our faces covered, and everybody was against Gaddafi on it. We told them that we were also against him, and they let us in. We kept silent until we went to Egypt, and from there, via Tunisia, we were sent here.
Salma's brother, Dr. Sabri, a surgeon, has also fled the city. He says they've made 3 attempts on his life, but he only finally left when he saw a killing.
And they take him from ICU and killing him in front of ICU and hanging his body on the wall of the Jallah hospital.
The doctor says people from the National Transitional Council were behind it. This is the rebels' official political body, set up after the revolution in Libya started in the mid-February. Its members are recognized by many countries throughout the world as the only legitimate representatives of Libya.
There is no other opinion than their opinion.
So?
You must be with them or you are against them. They talk about freedom and democracy. There is no freedom or democracy. They just want to power.
The refugees here say they now finally feel safe, but it's not that safe from this side of the front line either. These people have gathered in the west of Tripoli to bury those killed in a NATO airstrike, according to Libyan government officials. A bomb landed on a private compound and flattened it, killing 15 people, including 3 kids.
We have been calling for peace and negotiation for months, and no one wants to listen to us. And now we have to pay a very heavy price of casualties, civilian casualties, and also military casualties. I think the time has come for the world to understand that this conflict has to come to an end immediately.
Which is very unlikely to happen anytime soon. The newly dug ground in this cemetery is still fresh, while NATO has already claimed that the operation to protect civilians must go on.
With clashes continuing in Benghazi and NATO intensifying its bombardment of Tripoli, both eastern and western parts of the country are perilous to stay in, and people are dying on both sides of the front line. Many here on the ground fear that when the democracy the West talks about will finally come here, there will not be enough people left to experience it. Marif Noshna, RT, reporting from Western Libya.
Criminals and barbarians. That's how Colonel Gaddafi called NATO states following a recent airstrike that killed civilians. The alliance has said that it regrets the deaths. But investigative journalist Michelle Collon, who only returned from the war-torn country just a few days ago, told us here at RT that innocent lives mean nothing to the coalition that's only in Libya for financial gains.
They have killed more civilians than the losses from the initial problems. They have killed more civilians than NATO bombings.
Well, today I went to Salah Eddin, that's to the base of the feared Khamis 32nd Brigade, where at least 50 people were killed on Tuesday night. As we arrived, it was clear that tensions were still running high there, a warning some of you may find some of the images disturbing.
Approaching the vast gates of Khamis base in South Tripoli. Moments later, chaos, fear, terror, as first a few, then up to 9 African men are shoved into a gatehouse, arrested by anti-Gaddafi forces.
These are Gaddafi fighters. Gaddafi fighters.
They're terrified, sweating, praying, some are crying. They're convinced they're going to be shot. They keep whispering to us, stay here with us, stay here, please. Celebratory gunfire increases their terror.
Because we are innocent. We are innocent.
We are scared. We are scared. Listen, we're going to stay here because whilst we're here, they're not going to do anything to these guys. Huh? These 9 men insist they're just 9 young men from Nigeria who are trying to get through Africa to Italy for a better life.
At this point, the fighters' story that they were found with weapons seems suddenly to evaporate. They're let out.
If they see the women, it's okay. That's how we get out of this.
A decision to try and film their women nearby to prove they're not Colonel Gaddafi's mercenaries ends it all. They can cool off and go, but what if we hadn't been there? This is a bad time to be a black man in Libya.
While lying in hospital beds being treated for injuries, dozens of men were shot dead in this hospital in what can only be described as an execution. Inside, it's filthy and littered with decomposing bodies, too gruesome to show. The hospital in Abu Salim was abandoned when fighting in the district of Tripoli escalated. This man is wearing a gas mask because the smell is unbearable. The medical volunteers called here to help can only clear up.
We just collect the body and we will go to put them in the other hospital, in Tripoli hospital, the big hospital.
It's not known who killed the men, but many appear to have been sub-Saharan African.
And at the end of this smoke-filled street, an intersection littered with bodies. I count a dozen, a grisly tableau of urban warfare. The victims' hands bound behind them. The rebels say they were executed by Gaddafi's men. But these bodies appear to be black Africans, portion of Gaddafi's army, raising questions about whether the men were executed by the rebels.
Many foreigners who came here to work during better times are now stranded. Some were hoping to leave via Misrata port, but they can't get out.
All along the road leading to Misrata port, you find thousands of refugees, most of them from African countries, and they're stuck here, they're stranded here. They can't get anywhere. They
feel abandoned by their government.
Want to go to Ghana simply because anybody will not be comfortable to when he's here gunshot and shouting all over the city that we want people are dying. We are not comfortable. We want to leave. So we need help from UN.
Cries for help have so far gone unheard as the situation of those caught here gets worse every day.
Libyan boat carrying up to 600 people trying to flee the violence-torn country has reportedly sunk off the coast of North Africa. It follows an earlier report of 61 migrants from Libya dying from thirst and hunger on another vessel which had been adrift in the Mediterranean for over 2 weeks. Witnesses say NATO deliberately ignored the boat's mayday calls. Former Belgian MP Lode van Oost, who's been outspoken on the treatment of refugees, says it shows willful negligence.
These kind of events sound hardly surprising to me. You're talking about the most sophisticated technological army in the world, and they would not be capable of finding some boats at sea while they have operations chasing pirates on the coast of Somalia, where they can spot one simple tank in a city, and they could not do that. I hardly doubt it. So without getting into the details of these specific events, this hardly does surprise me, but it's only logical. Humanitarian concerns are not on the agenda of NATO. As far as I can tell, that these people flee the regimes that we have kept in place in the first place is only a human reaction to a desperate situation, and by bombing these countries is not going to help. On the contrary, what we could do is help Tunisia and help Egypt, the democratic movements there. Now that would send a clear signal to the revolts in other countries, but that is precisely not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're very fast with our armies, but when it comes to rescue people, it does be so slow. It's not some law of nature there. This is willing politics that puts this our priorities and not the people that are sinking on boats in the Mediterranean.
So now we have the reports that all over Libya they're murdering black people. Now Libya's always had black people in it. It's North Africa, but it's been predominantly Arab. even going back to the slave trade, one of the big countries selling slaves there in Tripoli to the merchant ships that came in to the capital city of Tripoli, going back thousands of years. And so there's always been a racist tinge, especially in the east of Libya, against black Libyans. And it was a lot of black Libyans that were part of the military of Gaddafi. And so blacks are being taken out of their houses with no proof, being lined up and shot, and they're in big giant piles all over Libya. And there's not a word out of the, quote, liberal pro-war media. So very, very serious situation.
يا جماعة ما تقتلوش يا جماعة اللي جابك هذا منو؟ نيكا في راسك اللي بتقول نيكا في راسك اللي جابك والله منو؟ اللي جابك منو؟ ما دزك يا كذاب ما دزك ما دزك هو اللي ظناه محمد
شوف روحها هيا تعجزت بتصير ضربة فك روحك دار بطانية فرشة فراش هيا عباد هزار بطانية شوف روحك هيا نبيك تفك روحك توا نوريني الكماندوس والصاعقة واللي يعلمون لك كلها نبيك أنا توا أسرع من البرق لا ما صبرش أنا جو أنت
They are frightened. Up to 15 crammed to a cell, the stifling heat amplifying their fear. They are Libya's new despised African migrants rounded up in their droves, accused of being Gaddafi loyalists. In this rebel jail, they are disproportionately represented, the vast majority of 300 inmates. This Ghanaian prisoner says he was on his way to his day labouring job when he was picked up.
Yes, I'm afraid because what are they saying? They say we have worked with Gaddafi. We too, we are not working with Gaddafi. We are here struggling to get money and go back to our country.
They all have similar stories.
I feel sad. I feel sad every day. I cried. Look at my voice. I cried. And they don't even have human sympathy at all. If we complain to them, they tell us we should go and die. Which is unfair. Which is unfair. We maltreat them well in our country, but they are maltreating us as if we are animals.
Dwali, a Nigerian, says her husband was arrested a week ago. Then she was picked up as she went out to buy food.
They seized everything from us. They collected everything from us. I hid my money inside my pants. They took their hand inside and removed the money. They take everything from us.
The man in charge of the jail, a computer sciences graduate with no experience of managing inmates, admits half the prisoners are probably innocent.
I'm not allowed to release them because I didn't bring them here. Someone else bring them here, and he signed for this. So that's the one he's responsible about, to release them or not.
A few hours later, he's replaced by professional jailers. But prisoners say nothing else changes. The shambolic situation here is symptomatic of the chaotic transfer of power across the country. But amidst it, there is an undercurrent of retribution that runs rife. Many believe the Africans here are Gaddafi's mercenaries, where in reality, hundreds of thousands were in the country before the war, working as simple day labourers. You only have to look at how the Libyans are being treated to see the difference. Their conditions almost luxurious by comparison. Fewer to a cell, more space to move around, better access to the scant water supplies. This Libyan prisoner picked up when he went to see his family.
Right now the treating is good, but some people come here and they call us dogs and they go like you work for Gaddafi or something like that, but most of us don't.
Regardless of nationality, what unites the prisoners here, however, is fear.
I don't know if they'll kill me or I don't know what's going to happen. They might shoot me or I don't know what's going on.
Their jailers promise justice, but amidst the appearance of prejudice, it may be hard to find.
The United States and NATO
are supporting an armed insurrection in eastern Libya with a view to eventually justifying a humanitarian intervention. Now, there's evidence that, in fact, Allied forces are already on the ground. We've seen reports of the British SAS, but we've seen other reports that say that, in fact, the number of special forces and intelligence agents on the ground is in the several hundred. This is not a protest movement, as in Egypt and Tunisia. This is an armed insurrection, and public opinion has been led to believe somehow that conditions in Egypt and Tunisia have, so to speak, spread to Libya, and that this is a spontaneous insurrection. It's not. It's been planned well in advance. General actually makes the statement that if there is the establishment of a no-fly zone, and he was very explicit on that, this would essentially mean also a bombing campaign, because you'd have to take out air defense. And what is implied and what is on the drawing board, I'm not suggesting it will be carried out, but it's on the drawing board, is an all-out blitzkrieg directed against a sovereign country in violation of international law. Sure. Is part of the battle for oil. Libya has 3.5% of global oil reserves, twice those of the United States. It's one of the major oil producers. It supplies large amounts of oil to the European Union. The geopolitical implications are far-reaching. It's essentially what Washington is aiming at is to establish a sphere of influence in North Africa, establish control over these oil reserves, which constitute billions and billions of dollars of proceeds for the oil companies.
Eric, thanks very much for being with us here on RT. Now, the UN mandate for NATO's military mission expires next month. The question is, will NATO stay on beyond its mandate, do you think?
Oh, I have no doubt about that. The wording of the mandate may be changed to make it a more humanitarian-sounding mission, but NATO has invested a lot of money and effort into this operation, and the lure of oil is overpowered. NATO is obviously committed to staying in Libya, maybe a long stay.
Nevertheless, also the fact that the rebels are made up of what, tribal factions, sectarian factions, it doesn't necessarily mean just because the rebels have won that we're going to see a peaceful future there in Libya, does it?
No, the only thing that we can safely say is that it looks like it's going to be a very confusing situation for quite a long time. For example, we don't know where Gaddafi is. He may be in the Bab el-Azizia barracks in downtown Tripoli, where I interviewed him for an evening once years ago. He vowed he would die fighting, or he may have left or gone into hiding. But the problem is that this so-called transitional government in Benghazi, traditional foe of Tripoli, Libya, was more or less created by the French. And half of its members are sort of exiles who are Western-oriented, been working with the West for a long time. But the other half, perhaps the majority, are Islamic militants. And so they're very strange bedfellows. And at this point, I don't see how they're going to get along.
Interesting you say that you actually met Gaddafi and you interviewed him. What do you make of his resolve, or some may say his timidness? He hasn't been seen in public. Nobody knows where he is at the moment. What's he going through at the moment? What is his plan, do you think?
Well, Gaddafi's been, President Reagan described him as the mad dog of the Middle East. He's certainly very eccentric and very odd, but he's also crazy like a fox because he's survived in power for 42 years after innumerable attempts to kill him. So he's obviously very weary, but he has vowed to fight to the death, and I wouldn't dismiss out of hand the fact that he's just being clownish or boasting about that. He does not have many escape routes open, maybe some areas in Black Africa, but he may take to the desert. Libya is a very large country, and try and rally some kind of guerrilla war against what he has described as a modern colonial reoccupation of Libya. And as an interesting sidebar, you know, the countries that are most prominent in the reoccupation of Libya are France, Italy, and Britain, which all happen to be the former colonial powers of the region who used to compete with each other for influence and resources.
Now, you're a war correspondent. You're not a stranger to these sort of things. You just mentioned the scenario where Gaddafi could escape, perhaps. Do you think then the media is jumping to the conclusion too quickly that it is all over now and that Gaddafi's days are numbered, or do you think Gaddafi really could survive this?
Well, he could. I really can't tell you now whether he may even be dead now. For all I know, the President Obama is going to make a statement in a couple of hours, which may break some news. Gaddafi may have been captured. We just don't know. But I don't think he'll be taken too easily, though. His two sons, his three sons, have been captured, including the most fiery Saif al-Islam, without putting up a fight. So
yes, and then again, we hear that one of them has escaped with the help of loyalists. So that's interesting. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are in safe custody.
No, and one hears that there's a loyalist counteroffensive going on, and even rumors that the wily Gaddafi lured all these people into Tripoli, and his tribesmen are going to surround them and attack them. But really, you know, this war is being fought by NATO. It's not being fought by this armed mob.
All right. Okay, Eric, just finally, this war is being fought by NATO. Presumably, they'll say, if it's all over very soon, it's won by NATO. But is that going to lead to the establishment of democracy in Libya, something the US and the EU are so vocal about?
Oh, I'd be willing to bet a lot of money against it. We're a long way away from seeing anything that looks like democracy in Libya, more like armed chaos for a long time.
Eric Margolis, always good to hear what you have to say. Thanks.
Sí, presidente, le comentaba que hace momentos el llamado Consejo de Transición Libio ha anunciado que conformarán un nuevo gobierno interino. También ellos están pidiendo hasta 1.7 millones de dólares a quien entregue al coronel Gaddafi, vivo o muerto. Así ellos mismos han dicho, y que hablan también de juzgarlo y arrestarlo. ¿Cuál es la posición del gobierno de Venezuela ante esto? Y si me permite hacerle una segunda pregunta sobre las reservas internacionales de oro de Venezuela, si han pensado trasladarlas, parte de ellas, a países con economías emergentes, como en el caso de Rusia, si conversaron sobre esto.
Bueno, sobre el primer tema, forma parte de esa locura desatada, pues, o sea, vivo o muerto. Recuerdo las películas aquellas de vaqueros, y cuando pegaban allá a la puerta de un bar, ¿no? Era recompensa, ¿cómo es que en inglés la pegaban? Vivo o muerto, wanted, vivo o muerto. Bueno, ese es un pillaje, un pillaje. Bueno, ahora, más allá de la suerte de nuestro amigo el coronel Gaddafi, ¿cuántos niños libios han muerto? ¿Por qué creen ustedes que le prohibieron hasta punta de fusil y ráfagas de ametralladora a Telesur salir de allá del hotel? Y a otros medios de comunicación que pudieran no estar siendo chantajeados ni amenazados. Porque en verdad tenemos informes, bueno, no verificados, pero informes de gente, de testigos, pues, de que la entrada de estas hordas, porque son hordas, a Trípoli fue en el medio de una masacre de población civil, incluyendo barrios enteros, urbanizaciones, niños, niñas y quién sabe, se habla de 2.000, 3.000, nadie sabrá cuántos, nadie sabrá. ¿Qué cosa, no? ¿Qué cosa? Es decir, el imperio y la OTAN, cansados de su fracaso, lanzaron la locura final de abrir brechas a punta de bomba, de mercenarios que trajeron por agua, por el Mediterráneo obviamente, reforzaron, expertos militares, las llamadas contratistas, bueno, porque vieron que no podían entrarle a Trípoli, ¿no? Con todas las bombas que lanzaron. Y pasaron entonces una nueva etapa de superior locura, masacre, masacre. Y para ello el silencio, no será transmitida la masacre. Un poco como aquello que aquí ocurrió y que dio lugar a aquel documental, aquella película que recorrió el mundo, la revolución, no será transmitida. Ustedes no vieron pues imágenes de la televisión oficial siria en plena masacre y en plenas horas de locura transmitiendo unas películas. Yo vi unos minutos ahí, películas y no sé qué otra cosa. A lo mejor pasaron Tom y Jerry también, como aquí, comiquitas, películas. El cinismo imperial. Por eso hay que preocuparse mucho por estas cosas. ¿Hacia dónde va este mundo? ¿Qué mundo le vamos a dejar a nuestros hijos, pues? La locura de un imperio decadente, pero loco al fin, y de gobiernos que se le subordinan. También hablé ayer en la mañana, mediodía, con el presidente de Siria, nuestro hermano Bashar al-Assad. Desde aquí nuestra solidaridad con el pueblo sirio, con el presidente Bashar. Están resistiendo las agresiones del imperialismo, las agresiones del imperio yanqui y sus aliados europeos. Allá están los libios resistiendo la invasión y la agresión. Pido a Dios por la vida de nuestro hermano Muammar Gaddafi. Lo andan cazando para matarlo. No se sabe dónde anda Gaddafi, creo que se le fue para el desierto. Está haciendo lo que tendría que hacer. Lo que tenía que hacer, pues. Dirigir la resistencia contra la invasión. ¿Qué más le queda a un hombre, a un líder delante de un pueblo agredido, invadido? ¿Qué más le queda? Aquí tenemos que neutralizar esas amenazas. Ahí andan algunos de los escuálidos frotándose las manos. El próximo es Chávez. Ellos como andan, algunos andan bien locos. Se imaginan aviones aquí tirando bombas para sacar a Chávez. Es una locura. No, aquí no pasará eso. Aquí no pasará eso, aquí habrá paz. Y cada día habrá más paz en Venezuela, más desarrollo, más felicidad y más amor entre nosotros. Así que, digo, sigo mi escalada, mi recuperación, y yo solo quiero vivir como voy a vivir con el favor de Dios para servirle a ustedes. Para eso es que yo quiero vivir, para servirle al pueblo.
He was Libya's self-styled revolutionary leader who ruled with an iron fist for more than 40 years. Colonel Muammar Gaddafi said he would rather die than step down from the leadership of Libya. But his grip on power also resulted in the death of many others. He leaves behind a country deeply scarred by his rule.
Gaddafi was delusional, unpredictable, disloyal, vindictive, and bent on entering history in the most significant way, even if that comes at the expense of people around him.
In September 1969, a 27-year-old Muammar Gaddafi led a group of army officers in a coup against King Idris. They proclaimed a new Libyan Arab Republic. Gaddafi modelled himself on Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser. The young colonel wanted to be a leader of the Arab world. At home, Gaddafi declared a cultural revolution. People's committees were formed. They were used to take over businesses and silence dissidents. Many disappeared. Gaddafi published the Green Book, which established the rule of the masses. In reality, the colonel exercised nearly total control of government. He even ordered the adoption of a new calendar, based on the death of the Prophet Muhammad. Meanwhile, Gaddafi antagonized the West, particularly the United States, which labeled Libya a state sponsor of terrorism.
Mad Dog of the Middle East has a goal of a world revolution, Muslim fundamentalist revolution, which is targeted on...
Gaddafi did support the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and he funded the Irish Republican Army and Colombia's FARC guerrillas. Then, in 1986, a Libyan-sponsored attack on a discotheque in Berlin killed 3 and wounded more than 250, including 50 American servicemen. The US responded by launching a series of airstrikes on Libya. Targets included Gaddafi's residence in Tripoli, killing more than 100 people, including Gaddafi's adopted daughter, Hannah. 2 years later, Pan Am Flight 103 was blown up over the town of Lockerbie in Scotland, killing 270 people. Gaddafi denied involvement. Libya endured years of UN sanctions and international isolation, but he eventually surrendered the suspects demanded by London and Washington, D.C. Then came September 11th. Gaddafi joined the West in fighting al-Qaeda. He abandoned his development of weapons of mass destruction, but Arab world ties remained strained. There had been claims that Libyan intelligence was behind a plot to assassinate the Saudi king Abdullah bin Abdulaziz. At a regional summit to try to avert the US-led invasion of Iraq, Gaddafi accused the Saudis of being US puppets, prompting an angry response from the then Crown Prince Abdullah.
Saudi Arabia is not a slave to colonial forces like you and others. Who brought you into power? Tell me the truth. Who brought you into power?
By then, Gaddafi had done enough to be welcomed back onto the world stage, playing host to world leaders in the spotlight. Estranged from the Arab world, Gaddafi turned to Africa. He proposed a United States of Africa, a grandiose project that was never taken seriously. As an uprising against Gaddafi gathered earlier this year, he blamed everyone from the United States to al-Qaeda and the so-called drugged-up rats and cats of Libya.
Muammar Gaddafi.
In one of his last televised addresses, Gaddafi threatened massive violence to quash protesters. Following a push through Libya by opposition groups backed by NATO firepower, Gaddafi lost his grip on Tripoli. Gaddafi's hometown of Sirte was his final stronghold. Africa and the Arab world's longest ruling leader has left Libya in tatters. Despite its oil wealth, the vast majority of Libyans live on around $2 a day. 40% are jobless. Many will remember Gaddafi as the leader who set Libya back many years. Matthew Moore, Al Jazeera.
Who gave coalition forces in Libya the right to eliminate Gaddafi? Well, that's the question Vladimir Putin's been asking during an official visit to Denmark. The Russian premier also said NATO's effectively joined one of the warring sides in the conflict, and more responsible action should be taken instead. RT's Daniel Bushell joins us now live for this in Brussels. Daniel, so the Russian Prime Minister has effectively lashed out on the operation there in Libya.
Yes, he's made the speech in Denmark and he was very angry. He says that Gaddafi is not the best person in the world. Sure, he's made many mistakes, done many bad things, but that does not give the coalition the right to bomb indiscriminately. His words were that they are bombing Gaddafi's palaces in Tripoli every night. Now, coalition said that their plan was not to get rid of Gaddafi. So his question was, Mr. Putin's question was, why are the coalition forces obviously making this effort to go after Colonel Gaddafi himself? Now, we also heard that the experts here in Brussels have confirmed that there is bombing going on by the coalition forces, which is not being covered by the media here in the European Union. Mr. Putin added that oil was a key interest for the Western powers, for the European powers who have gone into Libya, that they want to get rid of Gaddafi and install people who are more favourable to the European Union so that European companies can control the oil reserves. Let's have a listen to exactly what Mr. Putin had to say.
The coalition said destroying Gaddafi was not their goal. Then why bomb his palaces? Now some officials have claimed that eliminating him was in fact their goal. Who gave them that right? Did he have a fair trial? Returning to the no-fly zone, the bombings are destroying the country's entire infrastructure. When the so-called civilized world uses all its military power against a small country, destroying what's been created by generations, I don't know if that's good.
Mr. Putin said that they have to give the Libyan people time to sort out their own problems, and there's really double standards here, he added. There are several other parts of the region in the Middle East and North Africa which is facing pretty much civil war situations, but which the West is either ignoring or not really paying the same amount of attention to.
Well, Daniel, there have been reports about an EU plan to send army convoys to assist humanitarian aid there in Libya. Of course, there'll be those who say, well, this is really the start of a military ground operation, something, of course, that allies were adamant wouldn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard these rumours for the first time a few weeks ago that the EU plans to send up to 1,000 troops under the guise of so-called humanitarian aid. Russia fears that this will be used to plan an invasion and to carry out an invasion of Libya on the pretext of supporting humanitarian aid to the Libyan people. The draft plan is called U4Libya. It's supported by the 27 member states of the European Union, prepared by them, and it provides for ground troops, in fact, to be deployed by the Western coalition. In the port city of Misrata, which is currently under siege by forces loyal to Muammar Gaddafi. Here in Brussels, Michael Mann, the chief spokesman to the European Union High Representative Catherine Ashton, said that they would only send up to 1,000 troops, and the troops would only be used if they came under attack. Otherwise, they would only defend aid. Now, Russia has said that it will only support another UN resolution if it explicitly says that it will not continue the violence, that if it ends the violence and starts negotiations, then that is the only condition under which they would support that. Now, I've been speaking to military analysts here in Brussels, and they confirm that ground troops are already in operation in Libya. This is not being covered by the media in the European Union, but troops are already in operation, and they are pushing forward in Libya with Colonel Gaddafi as the target.
District number 2 in the centre of Sirte, where Gaddafi's fighters made their last stand. Even though they were up against superior numbers and firepower, they put up a tough fight. We're at the western edge of the front line in Sirte, and there's some considerable force here of fighters. But they've stalled here. They haven't moved any further forward. In some areas around here, they've in fact moved backwards. So the resistance is still strong from the pro-Gaddafi forces. They're showing no signs of giving up just yet. But it wasn't to last. On Thursday morning, Gaddafi loyalists tried to break through the lines and escape. The burnt-out cars, evidence of their failure. And then the news that Muammar Gaddafi was one who tried to flee and was captured. It explained why the stubborn resistance. This mobile phone footage shows the moment the former Libyan leader was taken. At this point, he was alive, but witnesses say he had been wounded, possibly in the shoulder.
When we captured Gaddafi, we did not hit him. Of course, there was a little hitting. We hit him a little in the beginning. This is the defense minister's watch, and Gaddafi was sitting on this gun, and he had a gold pistol.
Shaken but silent, he was taken in an ambulance to Misrata, flanked by scores of military vehicles. The shouts and cheers of the fighters reflecting their prized prisoner, but yet to divulge his identity for security reasons. But before arriving, he died. These exclusive images were again captured on the mobile phones of fighters. Exactly what happened is not clear, but that was not important to these men who filled the streets of Sirte with celebratory gunfire. Gaddafi's defense minister and head of military intelligence were both said to have been killed Thursday. They sang of victory and a new Libya. There were some pockets of resistance which were soon mopped up. Prisoners were paraded through the streets. It was claimed they were either mercenaries or die-hard loyalists. Some showed signs of physical abuse and were terrified. They were driven off to an unknown location. But among the celebrations, a drive through the rubble gave an idea of the true cost of the battle for Sirte. Hardly a building remained unscathed. Evidence of the intense fighting was everywhere. And the human cost. A body in the street and in the grounds of the small clinic in the heart of the combat zone, the graves of 24 men, probably Gaddafi fighters, buried almost where they died. What started as a peaceful protest in Benghazi 8 months ago has finally ended with the death of the man who called his people rats and cockroaches. But he was right about one thing. He said he would die in Libya.
Debate is bound to continue about exactly how Gaddafi was killed, but the fact is, alive no matter whether in captivity, he could still rally support and therefore cause problems. Dead, he can't. And his death brings a form of closure to this brutal conflict and now allows a new Libya to truly begin. Tony Berkeley, Al Jazeera, Sirte.
Today we can definitively say that the Gaddafi regime has come to an end. The last major regime strongholds have fallen. The new government is consolidating the control over the country, and one of the world's longest-serving dictators is no more. 1 year ago, the notion of a free Libya seemed impossible. But then the Libyan people rose up and demanded their rights. And when Gaddafi and his forces started going city to city, town by town, to brutalize men, women, and children, the world refused to stand idly by. Faced with the potential of mass atrocities and a call for help from the Libyan people, the United States and our friends and allies stopped Gaddafi's forces in their tracks. A coalition that included the United States, NATO, and Arab nations persevered through the summer to protect Libyan civilians. And meanwhile, the courageous Libyan people fought for their own future and broke the back of the regime. So this is a momentous day in the history of Libya. The dark shadow of tyranny has been lifted, and with this enormous promise, the Libyan people now have a great responsibility to build an inclusive and tolerant and democratic Libya that stands as the ultimate rebuke to Gaddafi's dictatorship.
עדויות לוחמים מהשטח מוסיפות פרטים על האירועים שהובילו ללכידתו בתוך צינור ביוב, לא רחוק משיירה שהופגזה על ידי נאט"ו. היחס לא זכה קדאפי, שכלל מכות קשות, עלבונות ולינץ' פומבי, עורר אמנם ביקורת רבה במערב, אך בלוב המראות הקשים נתקלו בתגובה אזרחית אוהדת. מגיע לו על מה שעשה לנו, לילדינו ולמדינה, מסבירה אחת מהן. לוב חופשית עכשיו.
اسكت يا
Fighters crowd around an ambulance purportedly carrying the body of Muammar Gaddafi in amateur video footage obtained by Reuters. According to the person who made the video, Gaddafi died in this ambulance as it travelled in a convoy from Sirte to Misrata. Shouting that Gaddafi is dead, young men rush the ambulance, desperate for a look at their former leader. Outside, fighters crowd around the man they say killed Gaddafi, hugging and congratulating him. He is the killer and I am the witness who saw him. He's the guy who killed him, shouts this man. He did it in front of me. I saw him. Details of the manner of Gaddafi's death remain confused, with contradictory reports emerging. Libya's new rulers say he was shot in crossfire, while other accounts suggest he was killed by the fighters who caught him. Sunita Rapai, Reuters.
Me decía, seguramente lo van a matar. En un caso así, Chávez, hay que morir. Y bueno, lamentablemente se confirmó luego la muerte de Gaddafi. Lo asesinaron. Bueno, un atropello más a la vida. ¿Qué más se puede decir?
¿Cómo cree que a partir de ahora será Libia?
Ahora, más allá de Gaddafi, a quien recordaremos toda la vida como un gran luchador, como un revolucionario, y bueno, y un mártir ahora. Más allá, esa historia en Libia está comenzando apenas. Está comenzando apenas, porque ahí hay un pueblo, ahí hay dignidad, ahí hay dignidad. El imperio yanqui no podrá dominar este mundo. Ahora, lo más lamentable es que en su empeño por dominar el mundo y sus aliados europeos, lo que están es incendiando este mundo. Aquí, por eso pido a Dios y al Cristo de la Grita, por la paz de Venezuela, por la paz de América Latina, para que logremos blindar este continente latinoamericano de guerras, de invasiones, de golpes de Estado, y sigamos construyéndonos y que nos respeten nuestro derecho a ser libres, a ser independientes, tanto los yanquis como sus aliados europeos, que ahora pretenden volver por su fuero, de viejos imperios, de viejos y horrendos imperios.
The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, David Cameron, was one of many international leaders to give his reaction to the death of Colonel Gaddafi. Catherine Ashton spoke from Brussels on the process of change in Libya. David Cameron began by remembering the victims of the former ruler of Libya in the United Kingdom.
I think today is a day to remember all of Colonel Gaddafi's victims. from those who died in connection with the Pan Am flight over Lockerbie to Yvonne Fletcher in a London street, and obviously all the victims of IRA terrorism who died through their use of Libyan Semtex. We should also remember the many, many Libyans who died at the hands of this brutal dictator and his regime.
David Cameron has been accused by some people within the government of trying to orchestrate regime change across the Arab world. Is this something that you agree with?
Of course. With France. Of course. It's very obvious. It's very obvious. You know, we told them, the British and the French, we did challenge them. We told them, send fact-finding mission to Libya.
Why do you think David Cameron is trying to orchestrate regime change across the Arab world?
Come on, everybody wants to be a hero, wants to be an important in the history. But history is should be built on concrete.
You're saying that David Cameron just wants to be a hero, he wants to make a name for himself?
Of course. Now you are from UK, you are in Tripoli, go and show me the bombardment against civilian districts, the thousands of casualties, that we destroy 2 districts in Tripoli. Show me. Nothing. And at the same time, you have a Security Council resolution against my country. So there is a big, big gap between reality and illusion. So they are living in their own world.
Britain and America are living in their own
Of course. They have no idea about what's going on. We told them, send fact-finding mission. And come here and give us a single evidence. Take your time. Interview anybody you want, whomever you want, but give us a single evidence. We invited hundreds of journalists. They are here. We told them, go everywhere. They found nothing. Zero.
Libya is entering a process of transition. It's important that its leadership unites to build a democratic future for the country in full respect for human rights. While the crimes of the past must be addressed, the leadership must also seek a path of national reconciliation.
And from Russia, President Dmitry Medvedev added his voice. Moscow had allowed Western military intervention in Libya to go ahead by abstaining from a vote on a United Nations Security Council resolution.
Мы рассчитываем, что в Ливии
We hope there will be peace in Libya and that all those who are governing the Libyan state, different representatives of Libyan tribes, will reach final agreement on the configuration of power.
смогут прийти к окончательному согласию по конфигурации
And we hope Libya will be a modern democratic state.
демократическим государством.
The Chinese regime has long had business ties with Libya. But with former dictator Muammar Gaddafi ousted, China has fallen out of favor. Now China's foreign ministry is refusing to acknowledge the new Libyan government. Here's that story.
Earlier this week, secret documents were discovered revealing the Chinese regime attempted to break UN sanctions by selling weapons stockpiles to Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Just days after this discovery, China's foreign ministry announced that they will recognize Libya's new National Transitional Council, quote, when conditions are ripe. After months of bloody civil war, rebel forces in Libya ousted Gaddafi and set up the National Transitional Council, or NTC. While most Western powers have recognized the NTC as Libya's legitimate authority, the Chinese Communist Party has not.
Our channels of communication with the National Transitional Council are open. I want to point out that the unrest in Libya is temporary, but the friendship between China and Libya is long-term.
It has been a delicate balancing act for the CCP. China is the world's second biggest oil consumer. Last year, the Chinese regime imported 3% of its crude from Gaddafi-controlled Libya.
We hope that Libya can respect China's existing trade contracts and take real measures to ensure the safety of Chinese personnel and assets inside Libya. We are willing to make contributions to Libya's post-war reconstruction within our power.
The NTC has promised rewards for countries that helped in the revolt against Gaddafi. The CCP, with its history of supporting Gaddafi, may now be at a disadvantage.
And Asia Times correspondent Pepe Escobar believes as soon as Western countries get Libyan oil contracts, they'll want to have boots on the ground to secure them.
This is the cover story. The story from the beginning was R2P, responsibility to protect. That was the basis for UN Resolution 1973. That was the basis of the agreement between the US and Saudi Arabia. We get a resolution based on your fake Arab League vote, 9 countries out of 22. And you can do anything you want with Bahrain or in Saudi Arabia itself. But this was the cover story sold to American and European public opinion, especially. The Chinese, the Russians, many people in Brazil, for that matter, they're not buying it. They know it's a U.S. NATO coordinated operation. Without them, there will be no victory. This would be a stalemate that will go forever. And we have the international community, sort of, basically the Atlanticist powers, taking sides in a civil war. So when they knew that they could go on for months or maybe years on that, they said, okay, let's try to take Tripoli in one day. And they did it because they bombed, basically they bombed the whole city and the way towards the city. You know what this reminds me of? I was there at the time. The Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq in 2003. This is the same thing. We're going to have Western boots on the ground, and we're going to open up Libya for hardcore, no-holds-barred turbo capitalism with repatriation of profits, let's get their oil as soon as we can, the best contracts possible and all that. This is completely crazy. If this is the way, we don't know yet, that the US and NATO goes, we're going to have Iraq 2.0.
Secretary, let's turn, if we can, to Libya. The UN and human rights groups are calling for an investigation, saying that if, as it appears from the videotape, that Gaddafi was executed, it was a war crime. And you're also coming under fire for what you said.
We came, we saw, he died.
Question, do you regret what you said, Secretary? Well, and if I may, do you regret what you said? And do you feel Gaddafi was wronged or that he got what was coming to him?
Well, let's have an investigation. I fully support the United Nations investigation, and I fully support the Transitional National Council's own call for an independent investigation. I support it on the merits because it's important to find the facts, and I support it as part of what will be a challenging transition process. You know, the Transitional National Council today is going to declare the liberation of Libya. They are then going to announce a new government. They need to make it clear that it will be a government to unify the country, to seek reconciliation, to make everyone who supported the former regime, as long as they don't have blood on their hands, feel safe and included in a new Libya. And so from my perspective, I think such an investigation would be very important to establish accountability, rule of law, and pave the way for the inclusive democratic future that the Libyans tell me they want.
Secretary, do you regret what you said?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. We didn't even know what was happening at that time because it was an unconfirmed report.
Moving on to some Russian-Libyan news. Russians push to investigate Libyan civilian deaths. The U.S. calls it a cheap stunt. And we reported on this back right when the invasion was happening, right when the rebellion was happening, that black Libyans were going to be targeted by this al-Qaeda force that NATO had backed and that special forces were assisting. And then we go to some shots of a town called Twyerga, and you can see blacks just laying on the ground. They're dead. There's more shots of them, some businesses, black-owned businesses that were burnt out. Here's some blacks that are being taken to detention camps, and here's more black civilian deaths. And these are people who weren't fighting the war, who weren't backing either side, but just happened to be caught in the crossfire. Yeah, there's a little boy there, and we also showed some video that McBreen put together that I really didn't want to show again because, although we should see it, the little girl with her jaw blown off, and wondering why she was dying a gruesome death, and it's horrible. And there were civilian deaths, and there were a lot of civilian deaths. And NATO and the United States don't want anybody to know about it. They want to pretend this was an honorable rebellion of people, and we all know it was al-Qaeda. And now you got one of the governors there in Libya who's now leading the attack into Syria. So I'm not questioning whether these regimes were good or bad or not, but putting in Al-Qaeda, our supposed enemy, is that good? Is that what we should be supporting? I don't think so.
Decades of Gaddafi's iron fist rule come to an end with his body being buried in a secret grave. That comes as a huge relief to the Libyans, but the controversy is far from over. The NTC faces mounting pressure from the international community to provide a full account of what exactly happened from the moment Gaddafi was arrested in Sirte to the moment where he was killed there. NTC says that it will launch an investigation, but there are doubts as to whether the NTC will be able to piece together the elements of the puzzle. It comes as the new Libyan leadership is scrambling to form a national unity government or an interim government within 2 weeks. This could be the biggest challenge facing Libya. They have to overcome a huge divide between the Islamists and the liberals, and the moment they have an inter-government will be the moment when they will tell the world we're finally ready to craft out a new Libya.
Did you celebrate the death of Muammar Gaddafi? Because I celebrated. Yes, I did. So I'm advising you, if you did not celebrate, to celebrate. It is a great day. Yes. I celebrated the death of Muammar Gaddafi a different way. You have now proven to me and to the world, especially to the Libyan people, that Gaddafi really loved his people. And thank you for that. How many leaders do you know died on the battlefield? How many leaders do you know died for their country? How many leaders can you show me that have been out there and fought for their people and died for what they believed in? Well, Gaddafi will always be remembered as the one who did that. Oh yes, death is a mystery. It has been used by God himself to show how much he loved humans. We Christians believe that God sent his only son to die for us. God is God. God could have done this any way he wanted to. If God wanted to save the world by just saying the world is saved, he could have done that. But he chose death. Why death? Because death is the most threatening enemy that we have on earth. None of us know what death is really like. None of us know what life after death is. None of us are even sure that there is life after death. And that is why death is the most scary thing for humans. So for someone to accept to die is very difficult. And what type of death? Before Gaddafi died, Gaddafi had his will. Many people know that. We've heard Gaddafi say that he will die for his country. We've heard him say he will die for his own people. One of the mistakes that the rebels made is that they captured Gaddafi alive. They could have just brought him to justice. Why didn't they? Why didn't they bring Gaddafi to justice? And then we heard that his last words, one of the questions that he asked those who captured him was, do you know the difference between wrong and right? So you have to look at all of that. And when you look at that, you can say that this is a deja vu. We've seen it before. We read about Jesus Christ coming to earth. We read about him being humiliated, about how he suffered and died. We read about how people tear up his clothes, how they say things about him, how they created stories to demonize him. But what they didn't know is that all of that was planned. He was playing that Jesus was going to come to earth, he was going to suffer, and then he was going to die to show how much God loved humans. He would send his son to die. I am not trying to compare Jesus Christ with Gaddafi here, but I'm trying to explain about death. So my question is, how many people do you know can die for those that they love? How many do you know can give their lives for what they believed in? We all know that Gaddafi had a chance to go on exile. He was proposed all type of things that you can imagine. He would have lived well if he had just let it go. If Gaddafi had accepted the offer that were presented to him, I would have been among those who would have called him a coward. But Gaddafi said one thing: I will die in Libya as a martyr. I will die in my country. I will die fighting. And he did just that. So bravo. You have just helped accomplish something amazing here. So are you still celebrating? You look at death as such a bad thing. You look at it as so bad that because he's dead, it is over. Everything will be well now. But you don't want to read through the lines. The reality is that it's not only Gaddafi who will die. And some of us will die as heroes, and others will die as cowards, after selling their soul to the devil, to money, and so-called power. So as you celebrate the death of Gaddafi today, future generation will remember that Gaddafi gave his life on a battlefield. Let's look at this another way. Have you seen the movie 300? When Leonardo took 300 soldiers and went to battle against thousands, Leonardo knew very well that he couldn't win that battle. He knew it very well. When Gaddafi decided that he was going to fight, he knew very well that he couldn't win. Even a child knew very well that there is no way possible Gaddafi could win. Look at who he's fighting against. So for those of you who actually thought that Gaddafi, by doing this, that he was going to win, Gaddafi is not that stupid. He's not that dumb. If he was that dumb, trust me, he wouldn't have been able to rule that country for 42 years. He shook the world. If you read about Gaddafi's resume when he was in power, you will understand that those who took him out had no other choice. They couldn't win him over. They couldn't convince him. They couldn't get his soul. Gaddafi sent a message, a clear message to the world, to the people of Libya. And he told them one thing: I will die for you. And you have helped him accomplish that. When you had all chances to avoid his death, you massacred him like an animal. For those of you who are hurt, who are asking questions, For those of you who are lost, without direction, for those of you who want comfort, let me tell you one thing. Gaddafi said no to slavery. Gaddafi said he will not give in. We will remember him as the leader who gave his life for his people. For many years was demonized because he looked different. Because he didn't dress like us. He didn't wear a suit and a tie. He wasn't handsome. So all of a sudden he was the devil. If you really think in your head that the devil is dumb enough to look different, well, my friend, you need to wake up. Those that you think are devils are not the one. In your lifetime, who is the one who's most likely to betray you? What experience have you had? The person who can hurt you the most is not the one who comes from outside. It is the one who is very close to you. It is the person that you can never imagine will do that to you, who is actually your real enemy. It is the one who's pointing the finger at the other, who's your real enemy. So when you're on a plane and looking for people to dress a certain way and to determine immediately that they are terrorists because they dress different than you, understand that is the one sitting next to you with the suit and tie who's pointing the finger, who is actually the real terrorist. The devil is not that dumb. The devil will not be the one to stand out so that you can identify him. So it is easy for us to demonize Gaddafi, to call him weird, to call him a villain. But we all saw that that villain was right when he said that he will give his life on the battlefield for the people of Libya. So I celebrate the death of Gaddafi as a real leader, a leader who stood up for his country. So to the Libyan people, to all of those who have supported Gaddafi, to all of those who fought for their country and who are still alive today, for all of you who are lost and don't know where to go, what to say, what to do, who to talk to, for those of you who are crying, let me tell you one thing. The reason why I personally don't advocate violence is because there is nothing I will do to anyone that will be worse than what God can do. So I'm calling on you all to forgive them. Forgive them. Because those who usually kill people think that they will live forever. They think that they will never die. From the moment when they start killing other people, they don't even imagine that they will take that same road when their time comes. Because even if Gaddafi was that bad, even if Gaddafi was that evil, you have failed when you killed him. You have failed to show the world that he was really that evil. There's a proverb that says, what a wise man can see sitting, a dummy cannot see it even if he climb up a tree. So, while you are celebrating, you are so blind that you cannot even see that you are accomplishing what Gaddafi has predicted. Thank you for proving me right. Thank you for taking part in this. Thank you for showing the world that Gaddafi can actually die for his people. Thank you for showing that Gaddafi really loved his people. Now the question is, can you die for your people? Or can you die for what you believe in? Or can you die for those that you love?
قائدنا معمر القدافي بنقولوا لك يا قائد صامدين معاك صامدين لاخر قطره دم والساحه الخضراء في باب العزيزيه ضد الناتو ضد بوشنا ضد مجلس العار المجلس الانتقامي ضد اوباما ضد ساركوزي go to hell Obama we're not afraid from you we're not afraid we are with Muammar Gaddafi this is the Libyan people not you this is the Libyan people all the Libyan people with Muammar Gaddafi our leader we will not let him go and he will not go. There's no revolution after Muammar Gaddafi revolution. There's no revolution. The only revolution that's in Muammar Gaddafi revolution. وبنقول لمعمر احنا صامدين معاك. اوباما مش خايفين منا ولا خايفين من ناسه. Go to hell, Sarkozy and Obama keep bombing, keep losing your money. We're not afraid. We are with Muammar Gaddafi. We are with Muammar Gaddafi. You should understand this word. We are with Muammar Gaddafi. All the Libyan people with Muammar Gaddafi. You are nothing, Obama. You are nothing. And the NATO, where is the safety that the NATO talk about? Where's the democracy of your country? Leave us, leave alone. Leave us, let us live in peace. Let us live in peace. We won't live in peace and peace with Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi give us the safety. Give me the freedom. Give the Libyan people the freedom. And Allah wa Muammar wa Libya